You're watching SAGE, the Sex and Gender Education Series from PFLAG of Jacksonville. On this episode, how to be a good ally. What does it mean to be an ally? PFLAG National describes it like this. Ally is a term relating generally to individuals who support marginalized groups. In the LGBTQ+ community, this term is used to describe someone who is supportive of LGBTQ+ individuals and the community, either personally or as an advocate. Allies include both heterosexual and cisgender people who advocate for equality and partnership with LGBTQ+ people, as well as people within the LGBTQ+ community who advocate for others in their community. Ally is not an identity, and allyship is an ongoing process of learning that includes action. In this video, we're going to talk about 4 ways you can begin to be an active and effective ally to LGBTQ+ people. The goal of this video is just to provide a foundation for those starting on their allyship journey, or for those who wish to improve their approaches to allyship. We'll offer additional suggestions and resources throughout our educational series that may be more specific to certain topics or groups of people, and will help you build on what's provided here. 1. Educate yourself. We've all heard it before, but it's true. Knowledge is power. One of the best ways you can help people in marginalized groups is to educate yourself on their identities, the issues their communities face, their history, the laws that impact them, and other relevant topics. It's also important to be sure you're accessing good resources. We want to be good consumers of information. Quality information generally comes in 2 forms: lived experience and empirically based. Empirically based information is based on research, science, and medicine. It's typically been through some kind of peer review process, or at the very least is properly cited. Primary sources for this information come straight from researchers, scientists, educators, and medical professionals in the form of lectures, journal articles, books, or sometimes their own blogs or educational platforms. Secondary sources for this information come from individuals writing, reporting, or speaking about what they've learned from accessing the primary sources themselves. In both cases, the information will likely be cited, or the citations can be made available to you, so you can go back to the original source material if you choose to. Research generally applies to large groups of people, but can fail to capture nuance and individual differences. Research and other academic sources can also be limited when it comes to accurately representing marginalized groups because, as a rule, those are the people who live in the margins of the research. They're outliers both statistically and socially, which means that their experiences may not be captured by social science that isn't directly focused on their community or identity. That's where information based on lived experiences becomes extremely important. PFLAG National has this to say about lived experience. Using lived experience as a resource is to value the personal experiences of individuals as much as quantitative data. For example, believing narratives of discrimination against LGBTQ+ people that persist even if they counter larger narratives of acceptance. The concept of lived experience as a criterion on meaning was coined by Patricia Hill Collins. Information based on lived experiences comes directly from the people living in the communities of interest. This type of information is often shared in the form of personal stories, community histories, and information released by special topics organizations focused on community needs. This information offers nuanced insight about people's actual daily lives. Qualitative research studies can also be a good source of empirical information and lived experience. These are studies where researchers invite participants to respond to questions of interest using personal narratives, then code them and analyze the data they find. You can't help or support someone if you don't understand their needs, and that's where self-education becomes crucial. While our queer and trans friends truly are the only experts of their individual lives and identities, it can be exhausting for them if the people who support them rely too heavily on them for education. Invite your LGBTQ friends to share with you what their identities mean to them and what issues they face, but supplement those conversations by pursuing this education on your own. Our SAGE series prioritizes both empirically based information and information based on the lived experiences of LGBTQIA+ people. Our content is created and reviewed by researchers, educators, and members of the LGBTQ+ community. 2, examine your personal biases. We all have bias. Bias simply refers to our preferences or prejudices either in favor of or against something. They can be small and hardly noticeable, or they can be deeply important to us. Biases are formed throughout our lifetimes, from the societies we live in, the cultures we belong to, the faith communities we may or may not be a part of, and more. Biases shape our worldview and have a direct impact on how we treat ourselves and the people around us. That's right, bias doesn't just affect how we treat others. Internalized bias refers to the ways these attitudes impact our own sense of ourselves. Start by asking yourself how you feel about LGBTQIA+ people. Think about how it makes you feel to see and interact with queer and trans people. Do you have friends who are LGBTQ+? Do you spend time in LGBTQ+ spaces? We may be aware of some of our biases, but there are also biases we may have a harder time identifying. People generally want to believe they're good and right. This can make it hard to be truly honest with ourselves when we have low or misinformed opinions of others. A wonderful resource for truly investigating unconscious bias is called the IAT, or Implicit Associations Test. The IAT is an ongoing research project from the wonderful folks at Harvard University. The goal is to use the tool they provide to answer questions that help reveal positive and negative associations you may have with a group of people or a certain concept. Some of the assessments included focus on revealing attitudes about sexuality and gender. The information this tool provides can give you an honest look at where you may want to start the process of your self-education. 3, understand microaggressions. Microaggressions are indirect, subtle, or intentional discrimination against members of a marginalized group. Microaggressions are called micro because individually they're not as glaring as other forms of discrimination and bigotry. That doesn't mean, though, that they don't cause harm. Imagine that having a marginalized identity is a bit like a sunburn. You're aware of it, and it has a range of impacts on how you move through your day. Now imagine a microaggression is like somebody tapping your back right on your sunburn. The first time it happens, it's annoying for sure, but you'll survive and it's probably easy to forgive. As you move through your day, however, the more people who brush up against you, who tap, touch, or even slap your sunburn, the more frustrating and painful it becomes. It's likely that, aside from the person who slapped you, most people don't mean any harm. Whether or not they meant it, however, their actions still caused you pain in varying degrees. That pain became harder and harder to ignore and tolerate as your day moved on. Calling someone by the wrong name or pronouns, making a big deal about how hard it is for you to remember their name or pronouns, asking someone personal questions about their identity, their relationships, their body, their sex life, asking personal questions about their childhood, implying they're just going through a phase, or insisting that they constantly educate you about their identity or other identities are just a few examples of microaggressions against LGBTQ+ individuals. Think of a microaggression as a question or comment that singles someone out, puts them on the spot, embarrasses them, minimizes or invalidates them, is passive-aggressive and/or mocking. Whether or not this is what you intend, questions and comments like this can be very hurtful to the person they're directed at. If you wouldn't say it to someone who isn't LGBTQIA+, think about whether you need to say it to someone who is. Also consider that things that are appropriate to say to one person may not be appropriate to say to someone else. Understanding our biases and educating ourselves helps us look out for when we may be committing microaggressions against others. That leads us to 4. Develop compassion. I love the explanation of compassion from the folks at the Greater Good Science Center at Berkeley. They say compassion literally means to suffer together. Among emotional researchers, it's defined as the feeling that arises when you're confronted with another's suffering and feel motivated to relieve that suffering. Compassion is a key ingredient in good allyship. It requires empathy, but goes beyond. Empathy is all about being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes, to imagine what they're going through and what their needs are or might be. Compassion includes the desire to help, to do something to intervene and improve their situation. One way for you to improve your compassion for others is to spend more time with them. Watch TV and movies that feature LGBTQ+ people, not just as side characters, but media that features our stories. Listen to music and buy art created by queer and trans artists. Follow queer and trans educators and creators on social media. Shop at LGBTQIA+ owned businesses. Make friends with queer and trans people in your community. Compassion doesn't just motivate you to help those around you, it also improves your own health and well-being. It releases oxytocin, the hormone responsible for our feelings of bonding or connectedness to others. This has been a foundational discussion on just some of the things you can do to become an active and effective ally to the LGBTQIA+ community. We will expand on these things and more in future SAGE content, but if you have questions about this or anything else, please don't hesitate to let us know. If you'd like to bring a SAGE training to your group or organization, please reach out to us by going to pflagjax.org/SAGE or emailing sage@pflagjax.org. Thank you for watching.